Welcome back to the Long View, everyone. I'm Julian Zelizer, and I am here with Charlie Sykes from To the Contrary, his Substack. And Charlie, nice to be talking as always.
Happy Friday.
So it seems to me, and I think you agree from what I've read, yesterday was a pretty difficult day for President Trump and the Republicans. What are your thoughts in Indiana in particular, where Republicans, probably most Trump supporting Republicans, voted against the redistricting in pretty significant numbers? What was going on there?
Well, that was extraordinary. We're always looking for, signs of the MAGA crack up or GOP defections. And we've been seeing a few. We've been seeing a few, straws in the wind, whether it's Marjorie Taylor Greene or that vote in the House to reject one of the executive orders. But I have to say that what happened in Indiana was truly extraordinary. I mean, it felt like the kind of thing we've been waiting for the last 10 years. And what I think made it significant was two things. Number one, the extraordinary pressure campaign that Donald Trump and his supporters brought on Indiana. I mean, this was one of the most vicious pressure campaigns, even in the modern political era. That's number one. Number two, it failed spectacularly because not just one or two Republicans broke ranks, but a large number. This is an overwhelmingly Republican legislature. And the vote on the gerrymander that Donald Trump had demanded was not even close. It went down 31-19. And the administration invested, Donald Trump invested huge resources. I mean, they sent J.D. Vance in. They had Mike Johnson on the phone. Heritage Action, I'm sure you saw this. Heritage Action, which is sort of the cudgel of the Heritage Foundation, you know, posted this threat that if Indiana Republicans did not go along with this, that Trump would cut off all federal aid to the entire state of Indiana. I mean, this is just, I mean, I'm sure that things like this have happened behind closed doors, but I'm struggling to find a parallel where somebody says, if you don't vote a certain way, I'm cutting off your money for roads, for guard stations, for major projects. I'm going to punish everyone in the state if you Republicans do not cave into me. And they didn't.
And what do you think, and this was what I was trying to figure out, motivated them? I mean, is this a vote to protect some semblance of stability in the redistricting system? Is it a vote against what President Trump has come to represent for the Republicans? What do you think is motivating them to say no, despite all those threats?
Well, there's a lot going on. There's a lot going on. Obviously these are Midwestern conservatives who have actually, still have been clinging to a rules-based society. So some of them were principled conservatives. The public was overwhelmingly against this. This was not popular at all. And some of them had very, very personal reactions to the pressure campaign. There was I think a 72-year-old state senator who told CNN this story and she'd voted for Trump three times. Understand, three times she votes for Donald Trump. She goes to her grandson's eighth grade school, to give a speech. And afterwards, her grandson says, Grandma, my friends and I have been getting texts about you, and they're all bad. And she's like, that's it. You are trying to bully and intimidate me. I'm going to speak out against this. You had another one of the state senators who announced he was going to vote against this after Donald Trump used the word, and I'm sorry to use it here, but the R word, retarded, to describe disabled people when he was talking about Tim Walz, the governor of Minnesota. One of the senators is the father of a child with Down syndrome, and he said, that's just words have consequences. So some of it was a pushback of the pressure. Some of it was a reaction to what Donald Trump has come to represent. And some of it was just people who say, look, this is not right. It's not fair. The people don't want it. Let's not do it. But we haven't seen this kind of a jailbreak at the state level. And I have to say, though, I mean, the level of the threats were so vicious. We were talking about reports of swatting and you know uh, bomb threats. Not to mention, you have J.D. Vance and Donald Trump talking about primarying them. And this might have worked someplace else, right? I mean, it works in Washington, works in most of the states dominated by Republicans, but it didn't work in Indiana.
Yeah. And it seems like a significant change. The other, so there's many things that happened, but another I noted you wrote about was this bill for bargaining rights, to restore bargaining rights for federal workers, which I think over a dozen or 2 dozen Republicans voted for in the House. What was that about? Again, trying to understand where these cracks are forming.
Well, I mean, first of all, this was another one of those discharge petitions where the leadership doesn't want to bring it up for a vote. You have Republicans, signing on the petition with Democrats to force a vote. This has happened several times, but it's extremely unusual for members of the majority party to file these, when they're in power. So that's number one. That this is pretty radical historically and institutionally. Secondly, this is very unusual for Congress to reject one of the president's executive orders, any president's executive orders. But in this case, it was one of those, stripping public employees of their bargaining rights, which is sort of reminiscent of Act 10 here in my home state of Wisconsin. Obviously, this offended a lot of members of Congress. They thought it went too far. But leaving the substance of it aside is their willingness to buck the president that you're now seeing. And we're starting to see a critical mass form. And you and I have talked about this before. The one thing that's been lacking in the Republican resistance to Trump has been that critical mass. He can pick you off individually. But if enough Republicans get together and say, no, this is wrong, we're not going along with this, and the numbers on that discharge petition and that vote were, I think, somewhat ominous. Now it goes to the Senate. Um, there's at least a reasonable chance that he will lose there. So we had this sort of split screen. Donald Trump with complete and total power over the executive branch, Supreme Court about to give him more power. And yet at the same time, you have Republicans who see blood in the water and are willing to do something they have not been willing to do in the past.
It seems like a combination of just how egregious a lot of what President Trump does on principle, even for a strong, solid Republican, combined with the normal dynamics of where a second term president should be right now, meaning his party starts to think about the future rather than the president. And those are combining and define the idea somehow he's immune from all of this kind of politics.
Well, that's right. I mean, he got a taste yesterday, I think, of what it's like to be a lame duck. Now, again, we've been through this so often in the past. I wouldn't
Right.
read too much into it. But on the other hand, it was a dramatic shift. And I just recorded my podcast with David French from the New York Times, and he makes the point. You remember back in 2024, we talked about the vibe shift, the vibe campaign, and how the vibe shifted against wokeness and stuff. And he argues that we're seeing now a kind of a vibe shift against the Trumpian overreach, the Trumpian cruelty, all of that. You're starting to see the people. This is reflected in the polls where people are just not buying this anymore. So I don't know. I always caution against irrational exuberance, but I do think that what happened in Indiana was very dramatic and it was very significant, potentially going forward.
And how do you think? So the president's finally responding to the criticism about prices, affordability, the cost of living. He spoke in Pennsylvania, both in terms of the message, but also the substance of what I guess he is offering. Um, how do you evaluate both of those?
Yeah, that didn't go that well, did it? And so he goes to Pennsylvania to speak to the unwashed about affordability. He spends most of his time mocking the word affordability, mocking the fact that there's a problem. There's a little cognitive dissonance. He gives himself an A plus 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 rating on the economy, but then he says he's going to fix what's wrong. But clearly, there was a tone deafness there. I mean, the fact that he went back to the "you don't need more than $2 and a few pencils" thing is amazing because that was kind of his Marie Antoinette moment. Here's a guy who's building a golden ballroom for himself, and he's lecturing working class people about you don't need those dolls. I mean, Julian, what do you need all those books for behind? Well, you only need like 3 or 4 books, right? So this sort of let them eat cake stuff was bizarre. The second thing is, what is the substance? What has he got? The biggest problem on his debt, I mean, basically in front of him, is this explosion in the in the healthcare premiums that's coming down the tracks. And honestly, he has no healthcare plan. He doesn't even have the concept of a plan. And so that crashed and burned in the Senate yesterday as well. So people are about to experience some rather dramatic sticker shock there. Beyond that, every poll that I'm seeing, there's a new AP poll out this morning suggesting that people are looking at their cost of living and they're seeing how expensive things are. And there's Donald Trump saying it's a Democratic hoax. I mean, there is a disconnect that we haven't really seen with, normally he has this reptilian instinct. Well, you didn't see that on display during that rant in Pennsylvania, did you?
Right. And I mean, the different, so obviously President Biden faced these same issues and was criticized for
Mhm.
not ignoring it, but arguing things were better. In this case, it just doesn't seem like he really cares that much at all. I mean, it's a different presidential problem. And I think you're bringing up the White House is relevant because symbolically it just kind of wraps everything we've seen in the last few months together, which isn't great for a populist agenda.
No, and he hasn't been out of this bubble of fluffery for some time. And I think you get out of touch. The people he's having dinner at Mar-a-Lago with are not worried about the price of their groceries. They have people who go do their shopping for them, right? So it does seem significantly tone deaf. He's obviously not that interested in it. What's interesting is the dynamic where the polls are pretty clear this is a problem. Republicans who are going to be running next year are telling him it's a problem. His own staff, his chief of staff, Susie Wiles, is telling him this is a problem. You need to talk about this. And so they send him out and he makes fun of them for being concerned about all of this. Now, can I just a little wonkery here?
Yeah.
I was talking to an economist the other day. He says one of the biggest mistakes that politicians and pundits make sometimes is they think that the term cost of living and inflation are the same thing, and they're not, because the cost of living is up dramatically since 2020. I mean, that's up, grocery bills probably up 25%. Costs of some things like beef are up by 100%. So they're up, and wages have not kept up with them. So um, if even if that's the cost of living. Now the inflation rate raises the cost of living, but when a politician says yes, but the inflation rate is going down, that doesn't mean the cost of living is going down. It means it's going up less quickly,
Right.
and people are still not catching up. So if your costs are at 100 and your income is at 90, you're underwater. You have a problem. If the inflation rate ticks up by 2 points, you're still underwater. And so all of these people, and this was the problem in the Biden administration, coming out with the whiteboard, showing the lines going down, it doesn't affect the lived reality. And Donald Trump came into office saying he was going to fix this on day one. What day are we on? And it's gotten worse.
And that also you have to add kind of structural price pressures, education, housing, things that have been going up for a long time. They continue to go up. And here you're looking at administration, or if we sat down and said, what has he actually done on any of this? It would be hard to actually list many policy initiatives. He's been focused everywhere else. And the one thing he did, the tariffs, are making this worse.
And that's the one thing he's not going to pivot on. I mean, he is a true believer on the tariffs, but he also, just weirdly enough, I think he doesn't understand how tariffs work. And there's something in his brain that doesn't connect. So, for example, he's been saying, we're bringing in trillions of dollars, which he's not, and Americans don't pay those tariffs; they're paid by foreign countries. But then this week, he announced a $12 billion bailout of American farmers. Now, why were you bailing out American farmers if tariffs aren't being paid for by us? And I guess the problem is that this notion somehow you create a problem and then you can solve it by moving the money around. I don't know, but I think the optics do matter here. That he does feel and act completely disconnected with these problems. He's much more interested in dealing with his foreign leaders and paying off his oligarch friends and deciding who gets to control CNN and stuff like that. Much less interested in like, what am I actually going to do? People trying to figure out how do I get from this paycheck to the next paycheck.
And another domestic story, which I saw you wrote about too, was this DOJ memo
Mm.
about domestic threats and enemies. What's in that memo, and kind of what are the red flags you saw when you read that?
Well, thank you for bringing this up because I think this was one of the undercovered stories of the week. I think people sort of shrug their shoulders and go, okay, yeah, so Pam Bondi and the Department of Justice and the FBI are going after political opponents. We knew that, right? That's not new. But there is this memo that's out there, and I believe it's an 8-page memo that really weaponizes and operationalizes this notion of we are going after domestic extremists and domestic terrorists. And the amazing thing is the way they define how you get on this list. If you are if you are anti-Christian, if you believe in radical immigration policies, meaning anything to the left of Donald Trump, um, if you are if you are critical of traditional morality and family, it's vague, but basically what it does is it takes the culture war and it inserts it into the definition of domestic terrorism and domestic extremism, and then it orders the FBI to create a list. And the question is, who's going to be on that list? You don't get any notice necessarily. You don't have any appeal. And will this be used? Well, will it? It will be used to chill dissent, to redefine what the risk factors are for engaging in public discourse. And they are going to use this to go after many of the nonprofit organizations that have spoken out on these issues. And people need to take this seriously because you're bringing some serious weaponry to the FBI, these joint task forces, and a reminder that you don't need to actually win these cases or put somebody in jail to ruin their lives or convince donors, I just can't give to this cause because I don't know whether I'm going to be on this list. And again, the significance of it is these folks are putting this stuff in writing. It's the sort of thing that if you and I had said they would do this a year ago, we would have been accused of Trump derangement syndrome, right?
Yeah.
And this debate about do we take them literally or seriously, or oh, this is just a social media post. No, we're now seeing that they are putting this down as official Department of Justice policy. I would urge people to go back and read this story and the implications of it, because this has got to rattle people in the legal community, people in the political community, the nonprofit community. Well, actually, any American who's concerned about these things.
So what does it say? I mean, I had only read this through your post. I mean, I had not seen the coverage of this. So here we are in 2025. If this was out 10, 20 years ago, it would be front page story, top of the news. Didn't really register. What does
No,
that say about
endless,
where we are?
endless congressional hearings. And actually, I was one of those who I read it and I sort of glossed over it
Yeah.
because like, okay, so Pam Bondi and Cash Patel are going after their enemies. We sort of knew that. And it was only when I started reading a couple of these dazzling details that I, wait, this is really amazing. And I think to your question, I think we've become numb to it. I think it has been normalized. We keep worrying about what happens when it is normalized. Well, it is. And also, I think we continue to suffer from this failure of imagination. They keep telling us what they're going to do, and we keep being shocked when they do it.
Yeah. And I mean, I would just add, I was just talking to John Alter about this. The we is also Congress. And I mean, if you had a Congress right now, Republican or Democratic, that was proactive,
Yeah.
this would be like the Frank Church Committee in the mid 70s, where this is revealed and Congress really has high stakes investigations and legislation. Without that, which is what we have now, there's no institution to turn the we into something concrete.
Yeah, and that is a marker of how much damage has been done because you know the founding fathers had a certain vision for the way the government would work. They would assume that Congress would not cede this kind of power, would be a check on the president. They assumed the judiciary would be a check. And right now, I think this is part of the problem, is that you look at where are the guardrails? Where are the red lines? Who's drawing them? What can they possibly do? And, I had a conversation about the the double tap murders, which I think are black and white. It's a war crime.
Yeah.
There's no question about it. And the question is, yes, but so what? Who's going to enforce that? Who's going to hold people accountable? We have a president who is broadly immune from any sort of legal accountability and who has absolutely unchecked sweeping pardon power to tell anyone in his circle, if you violate the law, I'm going to let you off the hook. I mean, this is something, you want to talk about a dystopian reality, that in some aspects of this federal government, it is a federal government beyond the reach of the law or of legal accountability. And that is something that I don't know, I never thought that I would see. I mean, I never, and I think that's why so many people are overwhelmed and disoriented by it.
And what do you think about on foreign policy? He released a national security document which essentially reverses President Truman's national security doctrine. I mean, we're pulling away from Europe. It's pretty explicit. And then we're not doing much in terms of, you can argue we're weakening ourselves vis-a-vis China. And yet here he's doing a new Monroe doctrine in Venezuela. And also putting these all together, kind of, how are you thinking of this foreign policy shift under Trump 2.0?
Well, Well, thank you for mentioning that too, because that I think was also an undercovered story. And I actually, it's kind of a slightly contrarian take. I was grateful that they put that down in writing because now we know that America has switched sides in the global competition. We are abandoning the post-war consensus. It's not just a rejection of Truman's foreign policy. Um, it's a rejection of the foreign policy of every single president since World War II. Eisenhower, Nixon, and everyone. Um, and it's also clear that we no longer regard China or Russia as the primary foes. It drips with contempt for liberal democracies, particularly Europe. The language that it uses about immigration and civilizational erasure is really far right identitarian rhetoric that was once confined to just, I'm sorry, white nationalist websites, and now it's there. And to your point about weakening ourselves, despite all this America first, the decision that Trump made to allow the sale of advanced AI chips from NVIDIA to China is an extraordinarily dangerous step. China, I mean, the national security community has warned against this sort of thing. We are now giving China access to the technology that will boost their military and might actually give them a tremendous competitive edge over the next several decades in the development of artificial intelligence. And Donald Trump has just done this. Now we get a cut. The government gets a cut, a kickback of 25% on the sales, but not everything in the world is transactional. So this was probably one of the most consequential foreign policy moves in the last week. And again, not sort of almost below the radar in terms of the debate and the coverage.
So before I ask my final questions, thank you to all the subscribers who are watching. And while Charlie and I are independent in thought and in what we do, we are dependent on paid subscribers to support us. So we do ask if you might consider hitting that button and becoming paid subscribers to our Substacks to support our ongoing efforts to give you good news, hard-headed news, and thoughtful analysis. So adding all this up, I mean, I think we've had many conversations where each of us are a little cynical about the idea that Republicans are breaking, but I think we are at a moment, both for secular kind of lame duck presidency reasons and for the particulars, where real tensions are emerging. In addition to his just total uh, bottom approval ratings, what are you looking for? Meaning, Republicans are not all going to turn to the Democrats. So, what are you looking for to know this can be real? It can affect the midterms. It could affect the MAGA Republican brand name.
Well, I don't expect anything really dramatic to happen until the midterms, but I think that it is interesting to watch how many Republicans are willing to dissent, how many Republicans are willing to break on substantive issues. The Epstein vote really felt like it was a pivotal moment. It was the break the glass moment for some of these Republican women. Um, will there be substantive changes? Unlikely. I mean, look, Are they is Congress exercising due diligence involving the double tap murders by Pete Hegseth? Well, okay, they put in the National Defense Bill that he doesn't release the full video. They'll cut his travel budget by one fourth. I mean, that's kind of a tap on the wrist. I mean, it's basically like a tickle on the wrist. So again, are they going to be aggressive? No. I do think though that what you are seeing is a building wave, a building perhaps a vibe shift where the country is looking at what's happening and they're going, you know what, this is actually not what we voted for. This is not who we are. It is kind of a stress test. I mean, look, this entire presidency has been a stress test of American democracy. I also think it's a stress test for the American conscience. What are we willing to tolerate? And I do sense you look at these polls and they are getting to be rather definitive. When you have disapproval ratings above 60%, when you have Republicans who are headed for the exits, retiring, Republicans who are willing to vote against the president, and the moment that people say, we don't have to cave into Donald Trump, a lot of that power dissipates, right? I mean, all of the oligarchs and all of the other Republicans up until now, law firms, universities, I told themselves we have to cave in because he's irresistible. What happens at that moment when you realize you can resist him? It's the right thing to do, and you can survive it. Then a lot of that power goes away.
Yeah, I mean, I remember the first No Kings March, and I think it was actually more important than people remember because it was probably at the height of his authority and aggressiveness, and people came out of the streets and said, no, and we're going to risk protesting and we're going to risk saying this is not American democracy in 2025. And I think that's accelerated. And I don't know. For me, Indiana is interesting because these are not non-Republicans; they're conservative
Very.
Republicans who said no, and that can be very contagious.
One would hope that it's contagious,
Yeah.
but I emphasize the hope it will be contagious.
Right. Fair and I think important. And finally, just the last thing is obviously midterms are about enthusiasm. And so one of the big risks for Republicans, I think, is this is just going to dampen the infighting and some of this frustration has the potential to dampen enthusiasm, whereas Democrats are going to be whatever they think of their party, full steam ahead.
Well, and you're seeing that in one election after another. That's not hypothetical. That's actually what is happening on the ground, and that's why I think Republicans are freaking out.
All right, we'll see what comes next. Charlie Sykes, to the contrary, we'll talk again soon. Bye bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.